My sister invited me to her baby's shower to reveal that the father of her baby was my deceased husband and to demand half of my inheritance. I said nothing until I showed her the documents that changed everything. IT arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was pink with golden letters that seemed to scream for attention. The first thing I thought was that Clara had gone overboard again. My sister had always been like that, dramatic, loud, the center of everything. I, on the other hand, was the opposite. Quiet, reserved, someone who preferred to stay in the shadows that we grew up together, but we were never close. Life had pulled us apart years ago, and our conversations had dwindled to the bare minimum. A happy birthday text, an awkward Christmas greeting. That's why, when I saw her name on that baby shower invitation, something inside me tensed. It wasn't just surprise. It was a bad feeling, one I couldn't explain, but also couldn't ignore. My husband, Daniel, had died just over a year ago. A car accident on a rainy night, a reckless driver, and suddenly my world fell apart. We had been married for 7 years, and although it wasn't perfect, I loved him deeply. His death left a hole I still didn't know how to fill. But he also left me something else, a solid inheritance. Daniel had been careful with money. We had a debt-free home, decent savings, and a couple of small rental properties. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, much more than Clara would ever be. And that had always been a point of friction between us. She never admitted it, but I knew she envied me. The day of the baby shower came quickly. I put on a simple gray dress and drove to Clara's house. It was a modest place in a quiet neighborhood, but the yard had been transformed. Pink and blue balloons, tables filled with sweets, a sign that read, "Welcome to Clara's baby shower." There were about 20 people, friends of hers I didn't recognize. They greeted me with 4 smiles, and I felt their eyes on me. Did they know who I was? The widow, the older sister, the one who had come out on top after her husband's death. I sat in a corner with a glass of punch, wishing time would pass quickly. Clara appeared shortly after, wearing a white dress that accentuated her 6-month baby bump. She was glowing as always, and people gathered around her, congratulating her, touching her belly. She looked at me from across the yard and waved, as if inviting me to come over. I didn't move. There was something in her smile that set me on edge. It was that expression she used when she knew something others didn't, the same one she had as a child, right before dropping a bomb. And I knew that bomb was about to drop. The gender reveal came later in the afternoon. They brought out a huge cake, and Clara explained that the color of the filling would tell us if it was a boy or a girl. Everyone clapped as she cut the first slice. Blue, a boy. People screamed and hugged, but Clara didn't seem that interested in the cake. She looked straight at me and raised her voice. "Before we continue celebrating, I want to share something important," she said, and the garden fell silent. "This baby means a lot to me, and I think everyone deserves to know the truth about his father." My heart skipped a beat. Clara took a step toward me, still smiling, and said the words I'll never forget. "The father of my baby is Daniel. Yes, Daniel, my sister's husband." The air grew heavy. Her words hit like a hammer, and the murmur of the guests filled the silence. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I just stared at Clara, hoping she would say it was a joke, that it was one of her cruel games. But she didn't. "Daniel and I had something special," she continued, as if she were telling a love story. "It wasn't planned, but it happened, and now this baby is all I have left of him. I think it's only fair that my child gets what he deserves, half of Daniel's inheritance, to be exact." The world wobbled. This wasn't just a revelation, it was an attack. Clara hadn't invited me to share her joy or to reconnect. She had invited me to humiliate me in front of everyone and to claim something she believed was hers. I looked at her, feeling a fury burning inside me, mixed with a pain I couldn't name. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her she was insane, that Daniel would never have done something like that. But I said nothing, not yet. That I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air while the guests looked away, uncomfortable. "Aren't you going to say anything, sister?" Clara asked, crossing her arms. "I thought you'd at least offer congratulations." I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in years, I truly saw her. She wasn't just my sister. She was someone willing to do anything to get her way. But I wasn't the same person she remembered. I had been through too much, lost too much, and I had something saved, something she wasn't expecting. We'll see, I said. My voice was low, but firm that I stood up, grabbed my purse, and walked to my car without looking back. I could feel her eyes and everyone else's on me, but I didn't care. This wasn't over. When I got home, I locked the door and collapsed onto the couch. Clara's words kept echoing in my head. Daniel and her, a child, the inheritance. It was too much. Part of me wanted to believe it was a lie, that she had made it all up to manipulate me. But another part, small and dark, wondered if it could be true. Daniel had been my rock, but he wasn't perfect. What if there was a secret he never told me? What if Clara was right? I spent the night wide awake, looking through our photos, our wedding, our vacations, the simple days of home. I couldn't picture him betraying me like that. But I couldn't ignore what Clara had said either. I needed answers, and I wouldn't find them just sitting there. So I started searching. The next day, I went through everything: letters, emails, receipts. Nothing suspicious, no hidden messages, no sign of an affair. I went to the bank, reviewed Daniel's accounts, spoke with his lawyer. Everything was clean, but something inside me kept saying there was more, something Clara didn't know, something I hadn't uncovered yet. Then I remembered a conversation. Months before his death, Daniel had mentioned he wanted to update his will. He said it was just a precaution, that he wanted to make sure I was okay if anything happened. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now, those words felt like a clue. I called a lawyer and asked for a copy of the final will. He said it would arrive in a few days. While I waited, Clara called me several times, leaving arrogant messages. "You can't ignore me forever," she said. "My son deserves what's his." I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to face her, not until I had everything in my hands. When it finally arrived, I opened it with trembling fingers. There was the will, clear and precise. Daniel had left everything to me. No exceptions, no ambiguities. But that wasn't the best part. There was something else, something Clara didn't expect, something I would keep up my sleeve. The will was just the beginning. There was another letter, one that would destroy her lie completely. But it wasn't time to reveal it yet. That moment would come later. When she least expected, I sat in the living room with the papers in my hand and smiled for the first time in days. Clara thought she had cornered me, but she had no idea I held a secret weapon, a truth that would crush her. And when the time came in front of a judge or in front of the world, she would find out the hard way. The days following the baby's shower were a whirlwind. Clara didn't give up. She bombarded me with messages and calls, demanding meetings, saying I couldn't run from the truth. Her tone grew increasingly aggressive, as if she were certain I'd crack under pressure. But I didn't. I stayed silent, planning every step. I knew this wouldn't be resolved with chat in her living room or shouting over the phone. Clara wanted half of Daniel's inheritance, and she was willing to fight for it. That meant we'd see each other in court. And I was ready. The will I had found was my first shield. It was clear. Daniel had left everything to me, his legal wife, without mentioning anyone else. No ambiguous clauses, no room for interpretation. But I also knew Clara wouldn't stop there. She would insist that her child was Daniel's, and even though it didn't grant automatic rights, she could attempt a legal claim if she proved paternity. That worried me, not because I doubted Daniel, but because I didn't know how far Clara would go with her lie. She could fake evidence, invent stories, anything to get her way. That I needed something bigger, something that wouldn't just defend my position, but completely destroy hers. And I had it. I was just waiting for the perfect moment to use it. A week later, I received the official notice. Clara had filed a lawsuit against me, claiming half of the inheritance in the name of her unborn child. Her lawyer argued that as Daniel's supposed descendant, the baby had a right to part of the estate. Regardless of the will, I wasn't surprised. Clara had always been cunning and knew how to twist things in her favor. But she was also impulsive, and that was something I could use. I hired my own lawyer, a calm but relentless man named Martine. I told him everything. The baby's shower reveal, the will, and my suspicion that Clara was lying. I also mentioned that I had something else, a definitive piece of evidence. But I didn't say what it was. I wanted to save it for just the right moment, when it would have the most impact. Martin reviewed the documents and assured me we had a strong case for the will, but he agreed we needed more to shut Clara down for good. If she insists on paternity, he said, we'll have to request a postnatal DNA test. That could end it quickly. I nodded, but in my mind, I already knew we wouldn't have to go that far. My secret card would settle everything before that. The day of the trial came a month later. The courtroom was a cold place, with gray walls and an air that smelled of dust and tension. I sat next to Martine, dressed in a simple black suit, while Clara sat across from us with her lawyer. She wore a tight dress that emphasized her now 7-month belly and had a confident expression that made me want to wipe it off her face. The baby shower guests weren't there, but I could imagine them talking about this at home, waiting for the next chapter of the drama. The judge, an older man with thick glasses, began the hearing by asking both parties to present their arguments. Clara's lawyer spoke first. He was a young guy with too much energy, gesturing as if he were in a theater play. He said Clara had had a relationship with Daniel, that the baby was a result of that union, and that as a biological child, he had a legal right to the inheritance. He presented a letter, supposedly written by Daniel, saying he loved Clara and regretted not being able to be with her. It was cheesy, dramatic, exactly the kind of thing Clara would invent. I looked at her while her lawyer spoke, and she gave me a triumphant smile. She wanted me to break. I didn't. Martine stood next and showed Daniel's will, signed and notarized, leaving everything in my name. He explained that there was no solid evidence of a relationship between Daniel and Clara, and that the letter was unauthenticated. My client has no legal obligation to share the inheritance with the plaintiff, he said, calm but firm. Without concrete proof of paternity, this case has no basis. The judge nodded, taking notes, then looked at Clara. Ma'am, do you have anything else to support your claim? He asked. Clara stood up, placing a hand on her belly like an actress in a soap opera. Yes, Your Honor. I have witnesses who saw me with Daniel, friends who knew about us, and I'm willing to take a DNA test once my child is born. That will prove I'm telling the truth. The judge frowned. A DNA test will be definitive, but until the child is born, we can't proceed with that. Is there anything else you can present now? Clara hesitated, and her lawyer stepped in. For now, we rely on the letter and testimonies. We request the inheritance be frozen until the test can be performed. That's when I knew it was my turn. I leaned toward Martine and whispered, It's time. He looked at me confused, but nodded that I stood and asked permission to speak. Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice firm even though my heart was pounding, we don't need to wait for a DNA test. I have something that will resolve this right now. Silence filled the courtroom. Clara looked at me, narrow in her eyes, and her lawyer seemed uneasy. I pulled an envelope from my purse, one I had kept since the day. I reviewed Daniel's papers. I opened it and took out 2 documents. The first is the will Martine already presented. The second is my secret weapon. Your Honor, my husband Daniel was sterile, I said, holding up the second document. This is a medical report from 5 years ago, signed by his doctor. Daniel couldn't have children. He never could. So no matter what my sister says, this baby can't be his. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Clara turned pale, her mouth opening as if she wanted to scream, but couldn't find the words. Her lawyer leaned toward her, whispering something, but she didn't respond. The judge took the report and read it silently, adjusting his glasses. Is this authenticated? He asked. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. I can bring the doctor if necessary. He'll confirm everything. The judge nodded slowly. This changes things. If Mr. Daniel was unable to have children, the plaintiff's claim completely falls apart. He looked at Clara. Ma'am, do you have anything to say? Clara stammered, her confidence evaporating. That can't be true. He never told me anything. She's lying. I'm not lying, I said, looking her straight in the eyes. You are the one who lied, and you knew it. The judge banged his gavel. Order. I'm going to review these documents in more detail. But for now, the case is suspended. If this report is valid, there's no basis to continue. The hearing will resume in 2 weeks. I left the courtroom with Martine by my side, feeling a mix of relief and fury. Clara caught up to me in the hallway, yelling, This isn't over. You can't take what's mine. It's not yours, I replied without stopping. It never was. That night, at home, I looked over the medical report again. Daniel had told me about it years ago after a doctor's appointment. He said he didn't care, that we were enough for each other. We never thought about children, and I accepted that. But now that truth had been my salvation. Clara had built her lie unknowingly, and I had destroyed it with a single piece of paper. But something still bothered me that the baby wasn't Daniel's. Then whose was it? Clara had gone too far with this, and I needed to know why. The trial resumed 2 weeks later, but the atmosphere was different. The last hearing had left Clara shaken, and I knew she wouldn't give up so easily. She had lost her advantage with the medical report proving Daniel's sterility, but her silence in the following days made me nervous. I knew her too well. When Clara went quiet, it meant she was scheming, and I was determined not to give her any room to maneuver. I arrived at the courthouse with Martine, my lawyer, ready to close this chapter once and for all. Clara was there, sitting with her attorney, her belly now nearly 8 months along, prominent under a blue dress. She looked at me with a mix of hatred and defiance, as if she still had a few tricks up her sleeve. The judge entered, adjusting his glasses, and reviewed the documents from a previous hearing. He confirmed that the medical report was authentic, signed by Daniel's doctor and supported by hospital records. With this, he said, the plaintiff's claim has no basis. Mr. Daniel could not have been the father of the child. Clara's lawyer quickly stood up. Your Honor, we request reconsideration. My client insists there was a connection with the deceased. We request a postnatal DNA test to clear up any doubt. Martine looked at me and I nodded. I knew this could be a trap, but I also trusted the truth. We have no problem with that, Martine said. But we insist the test be conducted under strict supervision to prevent any manipulation. The judge agreed. I will order the DNA test once the child is born. Until then, the inheritance remains with the widow. He banged his gavel, and the hearing ended. Clara shot me a triumphant look as she left, as if she had won something. I didn't understand why, until later. The baby was born 3 weeks later, a healthy boy, as I learned from a message from my mother, who was still in contact with Clara despite everything. The DNA test was done under the court supervision, and the results arrived a month later. When Martine called me, his voice sounded tense. The results show a partial match with Daniel, he said. It's not enough to prove that he's a son, but there's a genetic link. Do you have any idea what might be going on? My mind started racing. Daniel was sterile, that was a fact. But a partial match meant that the baby's DNA was somehow related to him. Then it occurred to me, Daniel didn't have any siblings, but he did have a father. Roberto, my father-in-law, a quiet man, widowed for years, who lived a few hours away. I had never considered him a factor in this, but now everything started to make sense. What if Clara had used Roberto to build her lie? I called Martine and asked him to request a DNA test from Roberto. If there's a connection, we need to know, I said. The judge approved the request, and Roberto, though confused, agreed to take the test. The results came a week later, and were a bombshell. The baby's DNA matched Roberto's, not Daniel's. The child was my father-in-law's son. The next hearing was chaos. The judge reviewed the new results and looked at Clara sternly. Ma'am, explain this. The child is not the son of the deceased, but of your father. What is going on here? Clara remained silent, her face pale. Her lawyer tried to intervene, but she stopped him with a gesture. She stood up, trembling, and spoke. All right, I'll tell the whole truth. Yes, I had a relationship with Roberto. It was a year ago after Daniel's death. He was alone. I was desperate. We thought that if I could claim the inheritance by saying the baby was Daniel's, no one would question it. The DNA would be similar, and with Daniel dead, no one would investigate too much. The room filled with murmurs. Roberto, who was present as a witness, turned red and lowered his head. The judge slammed his gavel. Are you admitting that you conspired to commit fraud? He asked. Clara nodded, tears running down her face. Yes, we planned it together. We didn't know Daniel was sterile. We thought it would work. I looked at Roberto, the man who'd been my father-in-law, and felt a mix of betrayal and disgust. He avoided my gaze, murmuring an apology I didn't want to hear. The judge didn't waste any time. "This is a serious crime," he said. "Conspiracy and fraud against a lady and her deceased husband's estate. I order the arrest of both." The sentence came quickly. Roberto was given 6 years in prison for his role in the plan. Clara was also sentenced to 6 years, but due to her pregnancy, the judge granted her house arrest until she gave birth. Afterward, she would serve the rest of her sentence in prison. The inheritance remained intact in my hands, and the case was closed definitively. I left the courthouse for the last time with the weight of the world still on my shoulders. I drove home in silence, the gray sky reflecting how I felt. When I arrived, I sat on the couch, staring at a photo of Daniel on the wall. Tears came without warning. All this mess, Clara's lie, Roberto's betrayal, the stress of the trial had drained me. Remembering Daniel, his laughter, the way he made me feel safe, broke my heart all over again. I had cleared his name. I had proven that he hadn't betrayed me, but the cost had been high. Yet, beneath the sadness, there was something else. Peace. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Clara and Roberto would pay for what they did, and I could move on. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I would face it alone, with the strength Daniel always saw in me. I got up, placed Daniel's photo on a table next to the candle, and lit it. "I did it for you," I whispered. Then I turned off the lights and let the calm fill the house.